Y'all, can I tell you about these Tecovas boots? I don't know if y'all know this, but these boots are handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable right out of the box. I know we buy everything online these days, but boots are something you really should get fitted for. And it just so happens Tecovas is based right here in Austin. So come shop with me at the Tecovas store on South Congress or the Domain. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, we're talking about something that's serious and at times difficult to hear. The killing of Garrett Foster by Daniel Perry has changed the way Austinites think about this city and policing. Governor Greg Abbott pardoned Perry, but just 2 weeks ago, Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza asked the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to reverse that decision. That is unlikely to happen. So let's take a look at how we got here with our guest, investigative reporter Tony Plahetsky. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch partner, Tecovas. It's Monday, June 17th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. So I am talking today with Tony Plahetsky, who is an award-winning investigative journalist in print and on TV, worked as a reporter at the Austin American-Statesman since 2000. You still work there, correct?
I still do, yeah. I'm about to start my 25th year, if you can believe it.
What? That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's amazing. You've been on TV with KVUE since 2013. In addition to being a regular correspondent for national news outlets, PBS, CNN, MSNBC, covering stories in Austin, you were nominated for a Pulitzer for your work in Uvalde, correct?
Yes, thank you. With my colleagues from the Statesman, our work was honored as a finalist for the top journalism prize, or what is viewed as the top journalism prize in the nation.
That's fantastic. So we're talking today about the Daniel Perry case. Take us back to the Black Lives Matters marches in Austin in 2020. I'm going to say from a personal standpoint, probably one of the craziest, roughest, tumultuous times for the city in recent memory.
I've described them as a real seminal moment in our community. I'd covered all kinds of protest over different causes and involving different causes. And certainly we knew going into Memorial Day weekend of 2020 that the nation's attention had really shifted and turned to police brutality. And we also knew there were going to be sizable protests in Austin. But the scope and the volume and the number of people involved in the Austin social justice and Black Lives Matter protest was really unprecedented. There are still pending criminal cases against police officers stemming from their conduct at the protest. There are people in our community who have life-altering wounds as a result of what happened from police use of munitions during the protest. But also, in addition to that, we saw protesters overtake I-35 and pour into Austin's streets. It was, frankly, one of the most memorable things that I've ever covered here. The amount of just sheer number of people pouring into the streets over this cause. And our protests extended well past that first weekend.
Now, I remember them marching, honestly, it seemed to me every night for weeks. So during that time, I had just lost my father. And so I was otherwise, preoccupied. But it was such a heavy thing in my head because everyone was protesting. It felt in that moment for me like, what city is this? This is not what is happening. But then also there was this pride that I felt that people were spilling into the streets and they were disrupting and they were fighting back.
What I thought as I watched it was There is a lot of pent up anger and pent up rage that has not really been addressed. There were a lot of emotional wounds, and that there are people in our community who had deep, unresolved questions about policing, frankly, not only in Austin, but across the state and across the nation.
So, we're talking about specifically the shooting with Daniel Perry. Tell us what happened.
Sure. So on that night, Daniel Perry came to Austin to drive Uber. He was stationed in Killeen, an Army sergeant. And so he's in his car and he's downtown in Austin. At the same time, we have protesters, hundreds of them, who are on Congress Avenue. Daniel Perry turned his car from 4th Street into the protest. And the next thing he says he knows, according to him and his narrative, is that his car is surrounded by protesters. Some of them, according to him, are sort of banging on his car. The perspective of the protesters is that, number one, Garrett Foster saw himself as something of the protector of the protesters, that in their minds, they did not see the police as being trusted to protect them during this protest. And in fact, frankly, many of them saw the police as their adversaries. And so they see Daniel Perry turn into the protest and begin to feel as though this is an aggressive move on his part, that this is no accident, that he intentionally turns his car into the protesters in a way to demonstrate animosity toward them, and perhaps even danger toward them.
I mean, why else would you turn into a crowd full of people? A few years ago, someone did drive into a crowd and kill a couple of people.
That was definitely, in the view of the protesters, what they were suspicious of or concerned about, and felt in danger. So then at that point, we see Garrett Foster move toward Daniel Perry's car. And then this, Nikki, is where it gets complicated. Did Garrett Foster raise his high-powered assault rifle at Daniel Perry? By the way, he also has a gun. So we're dealing with two people who are armed. Daniel Perry then takes out a gun in his car and fires at Garrett Foster and kills him. And so it was clear to me that the shooting of Garrett Foster, a well-known, high-profile figure within the protest community and within the community at large, was 100% newsworthy and absolutely would garner a lot of attention.
In my, I guess I'll say limited view, it seems like if someone shoots someone else, then they go to jail. I think like in my mind, it seems as cut and dry like that. And so in the immediate aftermath, did you get the sense that people felt like he would have been arrested immediately?
Certainly within the protest community and people who were friends with Garrett Foster and his longtime partner, Whitney Mitchell, and among those participants in the protest, I think there was a level of outrage that Daniel Perry was not hauled away in handcuffs and charged with some criminal offense. The police at that point, the lead investigator especially, had firmly taken the position that this was self-defense, and in fact stated that he did not arrest Daniel Perry that night or even in the subsequent days, because in his estimation that it was obvious to him that Daniel Perry fired in self-defense. And so that is why he did not make an arrest.
What was the aftermath of covering the shooting? I know you went to vigils.
It was a very difficult time. And keep in mind, there was already this raw emotion from what was happening on the national scene, the whole underpinning of the protest. And so the emotions were already really high. The anxiety, the anger was really high. And so then to have this layered on top of that just really, I think, fueled their pain, fueled their upset, and 100% intensified this whole situation.
Were you hearing anything from gun rights activists around that time? Were they coming to the defense of Perry or were they coming to the defense of Garrett Foster? Do you remember any of that?
My memory is that they were coming to the defense of Daniel Perry. They saw this as case in point for why Texas has, in their minds and in the minds of people like Governor Greg Abbott, one of the strongest stand your ground laws in the nation. And so their perspective was this is exactly why people need to be able to have guns to protect themselves in situations, ladies and gentlemen, exactly like this.
But seemingly that is only for Daniel Perry and not for Garrett Foster. And then there was that space of time where nothing was going on. It almost felt like a little bit like they were like slipping it under the rug. And then he got indicted.
Up until that point, I think there had been a lot of discussion within the law enforcement community and within the criminal justice community with regard to what a grand jury would do, how they would view this case. But I think once the grand jury indicted, that was a true turning point in the case.
We'll be right back after a quick break. I'm back with Tony Plahetsky talking about the 2020 death of Garrett Foster at the hands of Daniel Perry and the fallout that continues today. Now, once he was indicted and arrested, did you notice the public's response to the case changed?
Nikki, it will surprise you 0% that the crowd was divided.
Of course.
Within the protest community, it was a bright day, the day that Daniel Perry was indicted. They saw that as justice. I think there was a sense of relief that this pursuit of justice for them was coming together. On the other hand, there is a whole other crowd, many members of the law enforcement community, frankly. They saw it as an absolute injustice. The lead investigator in the case, who is now retired, he asserted in court that he did not feel as though the grand jury presentation by the district attorney's office was legal or fair or right. According to him, he had to edit his presentation to the grand jury to leave out favorable evidence to Daniel Perry. And so really, Nikki, there became this whole sort of sideshow and this sort of ongoing fight, which to some extent continues today between law enforcement and Republicans and Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza, who is a progressive prosecutor.
Did all of this seem kind of like predetermined for Perry to be found guilty and convicted?
I remember during that trial, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate among more apolitical attorneys who were just looking at the facts. They were looking at it not through a political lens, but through a more sober, legal, criminal justice lens. How's this really going to go? And I think there were really well informed, not just speculating, but really informed people who were following the case thinking they weren't quite sure that the prosecution was going to get the case over the finish line. That by their estimation, it was just totally going to be up to the jury and those 12 people in the jury box,
Really?
how they viewed the evidence. Yeah. But that's often how it goes, right? Often just how the jury, which by the way is how our system is set up, how the jury views things.
Were there any times that you saw politics maybe infiltrating a little bit?
I don't know. That's sort of the interesting thing about these cases is that often while there is a lot of politics and emotion around it, once it gets distilled um, to facts in a courtroom, they do sometimes play out differently. And I think that the judge in this case, State District Judge Cliff Brown, worked overtime and was very cognizant of ensuring that the courtroom was as sterile as possible and that this case was being tried according to the law and nothing else. Really, the facts and the evidence is what was getting litigated during the trial.
So after the 2023 jury conviction, some unsealed records showed those troubling messages that Perry has posted all these things about how he's coming to Austin looking for trouble. How do you think they played into the court case? Do you think that they mattered much?
There was a lot of discussion at the time around this. The judge has to do a test, and by the way, Nikki, I'm not an attorney, but a judge has to do a test weighing the probative value of evidence, social media messages like this, versus the prejudicial nature. So what the judge ultimately determined is that some messages would be allowed in, others would not be. I've always been struck by the fact that some of the more objectionable messages and racist, frankly, messages were not made public until after the jury had reached their decision, but they still found him guilty, not knowing some of the evidence that was not admitted.
How else do you think race or racism played a role in this case? Because Garrett Foster's partner is Black.
It was a Black Lives Matter protest. And whether police can be trusted was also sort of a fundamental part of the protest, and whether or not there is bias in policing. So I think that was certainly just baked into this whole situation.
Definitely just like the underlying current to me for sure. Now it's, 2023 jury conviction. When did Governor Abbott get involved?
I'll never forget this, Nikki. It was a Saturday afternoon. It was Easter weekend. My husband, Ro, was cooking because we were hosting family members on Easter Sunday. So he was getting ready, and I got an alert that Governor Abbott had just tweeted, really from out of nowhere. There was no buzz about this, at least not that I caught. And so on Easter Eve, here comes Governor Greg Abbott with a tweet essentially saying, I am directing the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to do an expedited review of this case, and I plan to issue a pardon to Daniel Perry as soon as their request hits my desk. And I'm not often shocked. I was shocked. I found that shocking because it was so extraordinary and so unusual. I've covered the governor's pardons in the past, and none had ever come down like this.
And it seems to me that it's just really unusual for the governor of a state to be so directly involved in something like this.
Well, sure it is, but this had a couple of very important factors going on. So Daniel Perry was convicted late afternoon on a Friday, and within literally hours, like three of them, Tucker Carlson was on his television show on Fox.
So this is a legal atrocity. It's so obviously unjust that tonight we extended an invitation to the sitting governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to come on this show on Monday. And we wanted to ask if he was considering a pardon for Daniel Perry. But for some reason, Governor Greg Abbott's office told us he just can't make it and that we should talk to the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, instead. So that is Greg Abbott's position. There is no right of self-defense in Texas.
We saw Kyle Rittenhouse get on X and demand that Governor Abbott pardon Daniel Perry. And so very quickly, almost immediately, we see this groundswell of far right voices demanding the governor step in, and step in he did.
I've stayed in hospital emergency rooms longer. Do you know what I mean? It feels just like a textbook example of just like privilege.
I mean, the governor almost never issues pardons in his time in office. When you look back over the years, what you see is that the people to whom he issues pardons are almost 100% convicted of nonviolent offenses. Many of them had served significant prison time, maybe even decades. Some of them had served their sentence, for they were no longer incarcerated before the governor issued this pardon. Keep in mind that Daniel Perry had not served a single day of a sentence. In fact, he had not even been sentenced when the governor stepped in to issue this pardon.
I have to ask, what makes him special? Do you think that it was the pressure from the right? What makes him different?
Well, the person who would best be able to tell us that or explain that is the governor himself, and he has not done that. What he has said publicly is, look, this was a travesty of justice. Daniel Perry was defending himself. This is a way to stand up for our law concerning self-defense. There are a number of schools of thought based on political scientists, political experts, political consultant types who think that look, Governor Abbott can present all day long that he did this because of what he sees as justice. But you can't, of course, strip out this idea that perhaps instead he saw it as currying political favor with a certain base. Certainly seems like no coincidence that there were these far-right voices emerging, making this demand. Whether or not he's doing it to simply solidify himself with his own electorate, his own constituency, or possibly looking further down the lens of his own political future and building favor with someone like a Donald Trump, who could possibly, appoint him to some sort of position in the future. That was part of the discussion, certainly at the time and most recently.
What happened after Abbott asked for the pardon?
The truth is, there was this sort of period of silence. And I think to some people, there was sort of a suspicion that maybe this went away, that it was just going to die quietly in the night. We were able to break news earlier this year that no, in fact, that was not the case. The Board of Pardons and Paroles had taken up its review of the case, just as Governor Abbott had asked them to do, and that they were scheduling interviews with those connected to the case. We now know that there was this sort of heavily choreographed effort by which the Board of Pardons and Paroles issued this recommendation to the governor. The governor swiftly, within a matter of minutes, grants the pardon. And as part of the heavily choreographed effort, the warden turns the key to the prison outside of Houston where Daniel Perry is, and Daniel Perry is whisked away from prison.
Wow.
What none of us knew that week, though, is that inside the walls of the Austin Police Department, there was this letter that was being drafted to the Board of Pardons and Paroles advocating for Daniel Perry's pardon.
Why was it so significant to you?
The letter ultimately did not go out the door, but we were able to get a copy of the draft, which essentially said their estimation, their conclusion of their lengthy investigation is that Daniel Perry fired in self-defense and that they thought that his conviction was an injustice.
Can you share how you got the letter?
I can't tell all of my secrets, Nikki. I got the letter ultimately from a public information request, but I knew about the letter. I knew the contents of the letter from sources who came to me who were like, there's this letter.
Public information requests, everybody. That's how you get the information. Do you think it will have an impact on future protests?
I don't know how to answer that. But what I know is that certainly this case has made an imprint in our community and even beyond our community, obviously. And it's going to be a case that people will talk about for years to come, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's definitely changed, I believe, how Austinites view our city. I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget that we are in Texas.
What was so, I think, upsetting to so many people in the criminal justice community is there's a lot of discussion about the politicization of the criminal justice system. And a lot of people really saw what happened in this case as that. And that there were politics at play on every side of this equation. And so I think to that extent, it served as a particular alarm.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tony.
Oh, this was great fun, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. Now, I know that was heavy, so please take care of yourself in whatever way feels best for you. If this episode sparked something in you, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.